That's right, folks. It's time for the news. It's time for KP's video news, y'all. And you know, I, w- I always try to do a little research, and I'm always finding a lot of stories and to report on. And this one particular story here goes back. This story goes back like 70 years, man. 70 whole years, all the way back to 1951, December 17th, 1951. And you had a commission that was put together at the direction of Paul Robertson, and so he presented this study back 70 years ago pertaining to this was a black activist accused the United States of genocide, and what they should have did was they should have actually took them seriously back then, 70 years ago, because a lot of the things that they said in their study have actually come true. So the charges, while provocative, offer a framework to reckon with systematic racial injustice past and present. And, so, it's really, really bad, man. 70 years ago this month, on December 17th, 1951, the United Nations received a bold petition delivered in two cities at once. Activist William Patterson presented the document to the United Nations Assembly in Paris, while his comrade Paul Robeson, the famous actor and singer, did the same at the United Nations office in New York. W.E.B. Du Bois, a leading black intellectual, was among the petition's signatures. And the group was accusing the United States of genocide, specifically genocide against black people. And the word genocide was only 7 years old. It had been coined during World War II in a book about the Nazi atrocities and adopted by the United Nations in 1948, though no nation yet been formally convicted of perpetrating a genocide. In a 240-page petition, so we charge genocide, the crime of government against the Negro people, was meant to be sensational. America had been instrumental in prosecuting the Nazis at Nuremberg, and now its own citizens were turning to the lens back on the United States in the most horrifying accusatory terms. Instead, the mainstream media largely ignored it. The New York Times, the Washington Post mentioned the petition in the brief stories buried in the back of the pages. The Chicago Tribune condemned it, and Raphael Lemkin, a Polish jurist who had coined the term genocide, publicly disagreed with the whole basis of the petition, saying it confused genocide with discrimination. The drafters of the document hadn't expected it to go anywhere, and they knew that the United States had too much power at the United Nations for the petition to be taken up. They had written it less as a formal charge than a presentation of an allegation, loosely written in the model of a legal brief. They hoped, though didn't expect, that the General Assembly, Commission for Human Rights, and other party at the United Nations might take up the issue for deliberation, but that never happened. But today, 70 years later, the document has new resonance amid the patent injustices of police brutality that continue to occur, and racial inequities in healthcare on display, especially throughout the pandemic. We charge genocide, explored these kinds of issues at length, making it a compelling case for thinking about structural racism as genocide, which demands not only condemnation, but also redress and repair. To consider the arguments in We Charge Genocide, drafted by some of the most notable figures in the mid-century civil rights movement, offers important insights into the current movement and how to move forward. The first case, first close to a miracle. After 2 years of political haggling Following the Nazi atrocities, UN members states each agreed to relinquish a small piece of their uh, sacrosanct sovereignty when the body passed the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. This codified a legal definition of genocide, criminalizing group destruction and opening the door to try perpetrators in an international court of law. Since then, the convention has been used both to hold perpetrators of genocide accountable in places like Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia and Cambodia, and importantly, to set up or pave the way uh, for a remediation mechanism after it's been established that genocide occurred. The convention defined genocide as acts committed with the intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. It also specified that these acts include not just killing, but also attempted group destruction through bodily and mental harm, impeding reproduction, harsh living conditions, and child removal. Second, the Black Civil Rights Movement gained momentum after World War II. Freedom struggles and racism became a focus of worldwide attention, and the newly established United Nations, which included a Commission on Human Rights, provided a new global platform for protests against racism, and U.S. black activists used it to internationalize and broaden their movement, in part by reframing it in terms of human rights. Two prior petitions preceded We Charge Genocide. In 1946, the National Negro Congress delivered an 8-page petition to the UN Secretary General asking him to take action on the subjugation of black Americans, particularly in the South, where 10 million black people live in deplorable conditions. The UN, mired in politics, failed to act, but the petition had some success, particularly abroad, in drawing attention to the plight of black Americans. Seeing the potential of such petitions, the NAACP, frustrated by the U.S. government's slow pace of racial reform, undertook a much more ambitious initiative. On October 23, 1947, it presented an extensive 95-page appeal to the world, petition to the UN. The statement, which garnered much more attention, lambasted the U.S. for denying a host of human rights to its black minority population. We Charge Genocide, a project of the Civil Rights Congress, followed in this tradition, but it was even more ambitious and inflammatory, explicitly situating its documentation of U.S. racism within the framework of genocide, a new kind of crime freshly outlined by the United Nations. We Charge Genocide starts with killing. The petition documents hundreds of killings and other abuses, some involving police, which took place from 1945, when the UN was established, to 1941. It asserts that more than 10,000 black people have been lynched or killed, often for something as small as a failure to say sir or tip their hats. Many more, it adds, suffered from serious bodily and mental harm from beatings, assaults, and terror caused by the constant threat of such attacks. Direct violence was only one part of the charge. Another part of systematic treatment of black people was within society. The petitioners were taking the minimalist language of the United Nations Convention on Genocide about things like conditions of life and giving it shape and form with real-world examples. The petition outlined the harsh living conditions to which black Americans were subject, lives diminished in terms of housing, medical care, education, segregation, job opportunities, sharecropping, incarceration, housing, poverty, and voter suppression. As a result, the petition states 30,000 extra black people were dying each year, and black Americans were living 8 years less than white people, and officials from all three branches of the U.S. government, the petition alleges, were guilty of inciting, conspiring to commit, or being complicit in such genocidal acts, with examples ranging from police violence to racist laws by members of Congress. Proof of black genocide, the petition concludes, is everywhere in American life, and is the conscience of mankind. The UN General Assembly should not stand by silently, but should instead both condemn the United States and demand that the country take steps to stop genocide and prevent its persistence. The petition had 94 signatures, including the families of victims. Some were Robeson when he presented the petition to the UN in New York. Some were with him, including the wife of one of the Martinsville Seven, executed after being falsely accused of sexual assault on a white woman. The petition was received by the UN officials in Paris and New York. Patterson even discussed it with a handful of delegates from countries like Egypt, Ethiopia, Haiti, India, and Liberia, but no one agreed to take it forward. Cold War politics were a large part of the reason why, and the U.S. government worried about bad PR during the Cold War, mounting a campaign to blunt any domestic and international impact it might have. In 1951, the Red Scare was in full swing. The Soviet Union was nuclear. Mao had taken over China. War was raging in Korea, and Senator Joseph McCarthy was now leading a now infamous hearings on the communist infiltration of U.S. black nationalists. We charge genocide petitioners were among the targets. The government had already confiscated Robeson's passport, which is why he presented the document in New York. It seized Patterson's after he presented the petition in Paris. The government launched a campaign to discredit the petition, fearing it would inflame tensions at home and impugn the country's reputation abroad. The sometimes bombastic communist overtones of the petition, as well as the communist associations of some of the petitioners, made it easy, even for sympathetic Americans, to see it was anti-American ideology light. Eleanor Roosevelt gave a UN address defending the United States in response to the document. In an interview, she emphasized black progress while calling the genocide accusations ridiculous. The U.S. also enlisted more moderate black luminaries to condemn the petition. Some, like NAACP leader Walter White, agreed to do so since they were wary of Patterson and wanted to distance themselves from the civil rights movement from communism. America's immense international clout also helped bury the issue. The architect of the idea of genocide, Lemkin, was still working tirelessly to achieve U.S. ratification of the UN Genocidal Convention, which faced resistance, especially from Southern Democrats, precisely because they feared the U.S. would be accused of genocide against its black population and couldn't afford to alienate the United States. Lemkin responded to the petition by publicly supporting the U.S. view, emphasizing the improving situation of black Americans while claiming the petition was maneuvered by communist sympathizers to divert attention from the genocide of Soviet subjugated people. And so, in a formal failing of his otherwise distinguished career, Lemkin downplayed the long history of violence committed against black Americans. Genocide means annihilation and destruction, he stated. In fact, the arguments in the document, especially with the belief of some distance from the Cold War anxiety of the time, look very compelling. While many may think of genocidal annihilation only looks like Nazis' mass murder, the U.S. Genocide Convention clearly incorporates more nuanced forms of destruction than that. Lemkin dismissed the lynchings and other killings detailed in We Charge Genocide as actions against individuals, not intended to destroy a race. But the petition detailed how such violence was not just individual, but deeply intertwined in the fabric of American society. Perhaps most importantly, it made the case that the systematic and structural nature of racism against black people in the United States was what made it genocide, a novel legal argument to expand the understanding of genocide that turned out to be ahead of its time. In recent years, some genocide scholars have begun to think in terms of structural genocide. This sort of understanding could also be applied to, for example, the the Uyghur people in China, where the group faces a sort of social death. Ironically, Lemkin's own early scholarship provided an important foundation for this view of genocide. When he coined the term genocide in his book, 1944 book, Axis of Rule in Occupied Europe, Lemkin defined it as a coordinated plan of different actions aiming at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups. This process, Lemkin stated, had two purposes. One, destruction of the national pattern of the oppressed groups, and the other, the imposition of the national pattern of the oppressor. Such group destruction was carried out not just by killing, but political, social, cultural, economic, biological, religious, moral, and physical means that crushed the spirit of the victim group. This is exactly the sort of interwoven tapestry of the group diminished we charge genocide sought to establish as constituting the genocide of Black Americans. I'm telling you, man, you know, so genocide seems and is hugely divisive, and it's unlikely the United Nations would formally accuse its wealthiest member and contributor of the crime, even in the past. But the petitioners weren't wrong to situate Black Americans' history in that bleak context, and doing so gives us, maybe surprisingly, some routes forward. And the United Nations remediation guidelines for mass human rights violations like genocide have some clear goals, and these include safeguarding basic human rights of the offended group, investigating abuses, and providing redress. Which might such remedy look like? Monetary payment is an obvious form of compensation, and an establishment of genocide can help advance current discussions about such reparations. Efforts to remedy historical injustices in parts of the world, often other examples, education, health services, criminal trials, structural reforms that have been implemented in response to genocide, and even in the face of only accusations, let alone convictions of genocide, truth-seeking commissions have been held to take seriously the charge and determine and acknowledge the extent of abuse. So, as the United States reckons with how to address its racial injustices, past and present, such examples of remedy for mass human rights violations give us the framework to think about how to do it justly and with the full acknowledgement of the wrongs committed. So right to this day, that was 70 years ago. Right to this day, man, you still have the exact same situation and exact same abuses going on. The exact same abuses going on. The exact same abuses going on. So, it's one of those things, man. What are you going to do? I mean, this is the exact same thing, man. So here we go. Anyway, I'm going to close with this story here because that one was pretty long. And this is something where you're getting a little bit of some, if you want to call it that, justice. Santa Monica, the city of Santa Monica, California, messages to people evicted long ago for the 10 freeway construction, and they're telling them to come home. And we had Nichelle Monroe, ties to Santa Monica run deep. Her great uncle is said to have been the first Black baby born in Santa Monica there more than a century ago. Apartments and other buildings in the beachfront city were designed by her architect grandfather, Vernon Brunson. Monroe remembers when her grandparents would drive by the intersection of 20th Street and Michigan Avenue and point up the alleyway to where their duplex used to be. In the spot today looms the 10 freeway, which cuts through Santa Monica Pico neighborhood and is built to stretch all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Monroe's grandparents, along with about 600 other predominantly Black families, lost their homes. More than half a century later, Santa Monica is offering a chance for some of them to come back. Starting in January, the city will offer affordable housing to those forced out by the freeway construction and those moved in the late 1950s when the city bulldozed another black area, Belmar Triangle, to build the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. Children and grandchildren of those who lost their homes are eligible. And Santa Monica's act of civic penance is an attempt to recognize the harm done done to the largely black communities during the post-World War II era of freeway building and urban renewal. The program is part of a nationwide movement to compensate residents for racial harms related to the housing and property. The efforts gained momentum after the murder of George Floyd in 2020. Since September, Governor Gavin Newsom signed a new law that authorized the return of shorefront land known as the Bruce's Beach to the descendants of the black couple who were run out of Manhattan Beach nearly a century ago. Earlier this year, Evanston, Illinois, became the nation's first city to create an explicit reparations program, providing black residents who face housing discrimination through much of the 20th century or their descendants money for down payments or home repairs. For Monroe, the building of the freeway left a family wound that has never fully healed. If you had something, you lost it due to eminent domain, due to racism, you're thinking about it, and it affects your every move thereafter, said Monroe, who lives in a one-bedroom duplex in Alhambra. And it's almost like PTSD. It affects how you think of yourself and society, what you believe is possibly in this society. And nationwide, more than 1 million people lost their homes in just the first 2 decades of interstate construction alone. Early on, highway planners targeted many black neighborhoods for destruction, and displaced families often would receive little to no compensation. The legacy of those decisions remains a tourist-friendly Santa Monica. Fewer black people live in the city today than in 1960, before the freeway was built. Those pushed out say people they meet often are surprised to hear Santa Monica used to have a robust black community. And the city program initially will be open to 100 displaced families or their descendants who earn limited incomes, giving them priority access to our apartments with below market rents. But city leaders hope their efforts will grow into a national model to address the past racist policies. And so we'll be able to right a historic wrong, said Santa Monica City Councilman Kristen McCowan. Eventually, we're going to do that for more and more people. And if other communities start to do their share, you can see a real tidal wave potentially across the country. And Santa Monica officials say they realize the program cannot make up for what was taken. And renters got nothing when they were forced out. Only their landlords did. Homeowners lost the ability to earn the generational wealth from owning property near the Southern California coastline. So you're talking about millions, homes that sell for millions of dollars. So I'm telling you, man, this is really it's just another scam. It's just another scam to whitewash exactly what they've done, because it's no way you talking about giving these people low income housing, access to low income rents. But what about all the property that their ancestors lost? You're not talking about doing anything to reconcile that or compensate them financially for what was stolen from them. So you're talking about basically making money off of them. Yeah, come back over here. We're gonna make money off of you, and then build this. We're gonna build this property under the guise of we're doing this for these people that got misplaced, and then before you know it, the owners of the property double, triple, and quadruple the rent to where you can no longer afford it. You're pushed out. They end up getting free property, and then they turn around and gentrify the property and make, start charging 4 or 5 times the amount of rent. Because nowhere in the world that an owner of an apartment building is going to be giving you less, letting you pay less for rent than somebody else that's living in the building is paying 4 or 5 times more, because they want that money It's all about that greed at that point. Oh, well, KP's Video News, folks. This is your historical update, channel. KP's Video News. KP's Video News, y'all. What's going on here with this? What are you doing over here, Oomps? What is Oomps doing? KP's Video News, y'all. You know it's live. You know it's live news, man. So you got to go ahead, go along with it. Go along with it. Go along with the program. KP's Video News, y'all. That's right. My theme song.